Thanks very much, everybody, and welcome to the last day of conference. And today's session is about equality and diversity. But equality and diversity are words that turn people off. I know that, and I think it's time to change the language, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But the service has come a long way since 1985 when I joined. We had equal opportunities in those days. Everybody used to talk about equal opportunities, treating people equally, and everybody was treated the same. And then we realised actually that wasn't right, and we moved on to equality and diversity. We've now got equality, diversity and human rights. We've got an ACPO, equality, diversity and human rights strategy. I bet there's not many people in the room who hand on heart could put their hand up and say they've actually read the equality and diversity human rights strategy. And that's the problem for the service. We have come a long way. We've made some real progress. You look around this room now and there are far more women in this room than there were when I first started coming to conference about 10 or 11 years ago. There are far more BME people in the room than we had that time ago, but there's still far too few people at our ranks, far too few people making progress in specialist departments, and far too few people from different backgrounds at a senior level in the service. We've also got far too many employment tribunals. If we were getting equality and diversity right, we wouldn't be having the number of employment tribunals we're having. So we're still getting it wrong. And there's a definite feeling in the service now that we're actually starting to move backwards, and that all that progress that we've made over the last 20 years is actually starting to move backwards. We've got the Windsor Review and the potential, and we haven't seen it yet, but the potential for that to negatively impact on underrepresented groups because of the way some of the recommendations will affect individuals, particularly around pay and things like CRTP and SPP. We've made, the other issue we've got, is the comprehensive spending review impact on diversity teams. There can't be many of you in your forces now that actually have a specific diversity unit or whatever it happens to be called. Most of them have been disbanded. It's been mainstreamed. Nobody quite knows what mainstreamed means, but apparently it means that we don't have to worry about equality and diversity anymore because we're all doing it. Well, we're not all doing it, and I think you would all agree we're not all doing it. We've made equality and diversity far too complex. We've got it wrapped around a massive legislative boundary that talks about what we can do, what we can't do. We've created a massive culture of fear, particularly around the language. You know, we sit with people and they say, am I allowed to say manpower anymore? Am I allowed to say blackboard? Are these words I can use? That's not what equality and diversity is about. Equality and diversity is just about respecting difference. We've moved into a tick box mentality. The whole performance culture that you're all totally familiar with has moved into the diversity world. It's all about being compliant, about ticking a box. An operational order has to have a section on it around equality and diversity and human rights, and you've got to tick the box to say you've considered it. That's not what it's supposed to be about. It's supposed to be about how we think and how we feel. And there's this confusion with political correctness and are we saying the right things? So we've actually still got some massive issues to deal with around equality and diversity, or as I prefer to call it, difference. And this culture of fear is probably the biggest blocker, I think, that we've got in the service in terms of moving forward. We've got somebody in the room with us today who I met at dinner the night before last, who I had a really excellent evening with and a massively educating evening with. And I've spoken to her. She doesn't mind me mentioning her name. It's Sophie, who's from the National Police Transgender Association. And Sophie was really open in talking to me about how she's transitioning from male to female. Now, that's really difficult for some people to deal with because we've often never met people like that. I've met a few people that have transgendered before, but it's just something that we don't talk about very often, and people are really worried about offending people and saying the wrong thing. And we've got to break free from that. We've got to give our staff the confidence to be able to talk openly about difference and to ask questions around difference. Questions that won't get them into trouble, that won't see them hung, dried and quartered by senior officers. And quite often that actually doesn't happen, but there's a fear that it will happen. And we've got to do something to remove that fear. So it's time, I think, to strip away the complexity around equality, diversity and human rights, to take it right back to basics and to start valuing difference. People are different. You might have two white males sat next to each other. They might be totally different. The backgrounds, the motivation, the family life, everything could be different about them. So it's not about what gender you are, what sexual orientation you are, what your ethnic background is. It's not about that. It's just about people are different. We need to worry far less about our legal duties and about the protected characteristics. That shouldn't be what we're concerned about. What we should worry about, or what we should focus our energies on, are the benefits that we get from valuing diversity. The benefits we get from having a team of people around us who can bring different perspectives and different angles and can actually enrich our team because of the different angles and the different perspectives that they bring. There are lots of benefits internally and externally, and I don't propose in this session, because I've only got a short spell, to go through the business benefits of diversity, but I'm sure you all know what they are. But we don't focus on them. We focus on the legal duties. We focus on the compliance issues. And that's what we've got to move away from. We've got to get the best out of our staff. We talked on Monday about the reducing numbers right across the service, not just in our membership. The reducing numbers mean there's fewer people out there to do the job, so we've got to actually get the best out of them. And we only get the best out of our teams when we value difference. I'm quite satisfied that if we do the right thing for the right reason, we'll actually comply with all the legal duties. That'll happen naturally, because actually all the legal duties are asking you to do is do the right thing. So we've got an opportunity to refresh our approach. Alf Hitchcock from Bedfordshire, the chief at Beds, is taken over the ACPO business area for EDHR, and he's refreshing the strategy. The first problem is he's calling it the ACPO Equality, Diversity and Human Rights Strategy. I think that's just the wrong way forward. I think we've got to take away all that language and make it mean something to our staff, particularly sergeants and inspectors, because they're the people right at the front line that will really start to make the changes. But that change has got to come from the top. It's got to come from people like us. The College of Policing will also present some opportunities around culturally how the service approaches issues of difference. And I'm quite optimistic about what we might be able to do with the College of Policing. But what today's about is actually seeing diversity from the perspective of just being different. Forget those protected characteristics. What you're going to see today is a presentation that is about somebody who was different and what the consequences were of that person being different and that difference not being tolerated and recognised. I'm not going to say much more now. I'll talk a little bit later and there'll be a time for Q&A. But I'll just ask Paul Symes to introduce Sylvia, who's our main presenter for this session today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Irene. So, who am I? Many of you might know me. My name's Paul Symes. I'm the head of neighbourhood policing and response for Gwent Police, and I have the privilege of commanding a team of over 1,200 people. My personal portfolios include hate crime, operational diversity, antisocial behaviour, and volume crime. But for some, I might be the only Welshman in the NEC village. Firstly, can I thank Derek and Irene for supporting this main hall presentation. It's my 7th conference, at least my 7th conference, so I thought it was time I pulled my finger out. Can I also thank my NEC colleagues for helping to share and shape my message for today. You know who you are. As a service, we've come a long way, but there's definitely more we can do. My aim today has been quite simple, to invite people to think about diversity in a different way. I should say, though, I'm not on any ACPO business area. I've never sat in a national working group, but I know what I know what I see, and I know what people tell me. Over my 29 years service, I've met a number of very inspirational people, and I'm going to name some of them. A man by the name of Stephen Covey, who helped me understand the opportunities for principled leaders to create an environment in which all kinds of people can flourish and achieve their potential. And yes, deliver greater performance. A man that some people might know, Sir Terry Matthews, for bringing the Ryder Cup to Newport and putting Wales on the map. And for those who don't know, the Ryder Cup is a game about hitting a white ball around a field. And more importantly, for his work in encouraging young people to build new business opportunities to help build a vibrant economy. Earlier this year, I had the privilege of meeting Sylvia Lancaster at a hate crime conference in Gwent. On that day, I promised to try and secure for Sylvia a larger stage for her message, but more importantly, to arrange for her story to be heard by the senior operational leaders in the service. Because I told Sylvia that the people in this room make a difference. And I hope you will. And I know you already have in many areas. I know Sylvia's presentation will without doubt stir emotions in many of you, but more importantly, and hopefully, action. This session intends to invite you to look at valuing difference through a new lens, if you like. Sylvia will remind us where hatred and intolerance can take people and communities. It's very hard-hitting, but we make no apologies for that. As guardians of the service, can I ask, for example, that we build on the positive momentum from the Olympic and Paralympic Games by exploring how people with disabilities access our service and your services locally. Believe me, there's room for improvement. In Gwent, we've worked closely with the deaf community to improve things, but there's still more to do, and we're working on some exciting new developments around using technology. Taking into account Sylvia's presentation, you might wish to explore how your school's officers, if you've got them and plan to retain them, are engaging with young people about different cultures, with the aim of creating a more tolerant and inclusive society that welcomes difference. In particular, though, can I ask that you think about what this session means for you, bearing in mind what you stand for, where you work, but more importantly, what action you could take to help people exercise their human rights and achieve their potential in life. This is not soft touch stuff. You know what you do can have a real impact. As the Home Secretary said yesterday, preventing crime helps cut crime. But lastly, before I introduce Sylvia, can I just do a little bit of audience participation, if you'll allow me to indulge myself and you. How many people in this room were born in the 60s and 70s? I would imagine quite a few. Could you just show hands? Okay. This actually requires a bit of moral courage, so some of you know where I'm going to go with this one. Alan? How many of you were punks when you were teenagers? How many of you were into punk? Yeah? Okay, come on, get those hands up. How many of you were mods? Any mods in the room? Yeah? New romantics? Yeah? Well, I was a bit of a mixed-up teenager. I was all three at different times. The 70s and 80s were a great time, weren't they, for mixed music. Okay, think about what you've just said and what I asked you to talk about or disclose. And remember this when you're listening and watching the presentation. And remember who you were then and who you are now. I think I've said enough. It's time to invite Sylvia to share her story with you. Colleagues, Sylvia Lancaster.
It really is difficult to follow something quite as powerful as that. But I just want to give you a couple of messages before we move on to some question and answer. I know we're running a little bit late, but I'm sure we can run on into the break. People aren't born evil. There's a saying, and I haven't been able to find the source of this, but there's a saying that says, all that's necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. You and I are the good men. We are the people who can change things. But if we're going to change it, Difference must be about everyone, not just those with protected characteristics. We need to address the culture and the environment, particularly in the workplace, as well as processes. And we need to measure our success by how people feel and not just by measuring numbers. And this is going to take some effort. It's about moving from that compliance culture to an understanding culture. And you and I and all our members have a key role to play in that. And what I'm asking of you today is to reflect on what you've seen and to think that what you might do personally when you go back to force about what you've seen today. It might be nothing at all to do with the Sophie charity. I'm hoping it is. It might be nothing at all to do with that. But all I ask of you is to go back and make a difference. Let's move on to some questions and answers. Thanks, John.
I'm almost speechless at what I saw and heard there, Sylvia. I found that really, really very moving indeed, and I can't say enough in way of tribute to what your courage and your determination in doing what you're doing to try and change things. We've got some questions. Just one question from me before we kick off. I mean, do you said in your own community, are you making a difference? I mean, has anything changed? Do you think the same thing could happen again?
I think things are changing very slowly, and I know that they are because we get young people in particular saying to us, you know, thanks for what you're doing. You know, you've become our voice, and that's how that community see the foundation. We don't get funding off anybody. We are self-funded, and you know, we kept going by that community because they believe in what we're doing, and they know that what we're doing is right. And you know, they've been amazing, really.
Well, that's encouraging. We've got a question down there. Who, just stand up if you would, so tell us who you are and what your point is. It doesn't have to be a question, it might be just a comment, doesn't matter.
Good morning, Chris Borloo from the Met. I don't know what to say really, other than thank you for just reminding us why we all joined the job. Well, certainly from my perspective anyway. We come to conferences, we think about budgets and policies and procedures, and it's very easy sometimes to forget when we're here sat in a big room like this as to why we did join the police. And certainly you've reminded me that we have got a difference to make, so thank you for coming. Thank you for being honest. I think that is a trait we quite like, and we like a bit of honesty sometimes. It makes us just reflect and think. I guess the actual question I was going to ask actually was more towards Irene. We know that ACPO even debated not having the business area, and because they thought we'd perhaps tick the box and moved on, and things were, you know, we've just done that now, and you know, as a service sometimes we like to just tick a box and move on. So I guess the question is, how do we get the balance right from having a bureaucratic tick box system with equality impact assessments for everything and a process that we have to do, as you know, quite rightly pointed out? How do we make that more kind of embedded in what we do, so that we're not just ticking boxes, we're actually making that difference, not just to our own staff, because I think if we can't save ourselves, how can we save anybody else? But also, I think for some of the people that are out there that Sylvia's quite rightly pointed out need our help and support. So how do we do that both for ourselves and for the people we serve without making it too bureaucratic and box ticking?
I think the main issue for me is we need a cultural mindset change. We need to stop and move away from, as I said, that compliance culture. We're working closely with Alf Hitchcock and his development of the new strategy, and I think Alf gets it. I think Alf understands that we need to break it right down and take it back to basics. And the work he's doing in beds, and the beds guys, I think, are down here at the front, I think he's trying really hard to move away from the sort of diversity to actually, this is about caring about people and treating people right. So I think he's trying hard. I think his challenge is convincing the rest of ACPO. If I'm honest, I think this has to start at the top. If ACPO aren't going to totally commit themselves to changing the culture in their different forces, the members of ACPO I'm talking about, then we've got to try and do that. If they're not going to do it, then I think we should take that responsibility on, and we should try and engender that culture change, that mindset change, that actually let's move away from the compliance culture. Let's move towards just understanding difference and treating people right. There's lots of stuff around processes, but you can have all the processes you like. If you don't change the culture, you'll never really get sustainable change.
The trouble is, it's in people's heads. Let me tell you something. When I was a kid, I was brought up in the pen. I'm not too far from where you are, Sylvia, and I went to a local primary school, and we're talking about the 1950s now, right? And the kids used to run around. A term of abuse, and this was 6, 7-year-old kids, including me, was you dirty Arab or you sweaty Jew. We hadn't got a single Arab within 50 miles, I wouldn't think, of Diggle. I lived in Saddleworth, famous for all the reasons later. And we hadn't got any member of the Jewish community. There's no one I could think. Now, where did that come from? Where did that get in my head, or the heads of other kids? That's what you're fighting. You know, I couldn't even begin to explain how we came up with phrases like that, and yet it was there. It was an inherent sort of racism, and I think, I don't know what I'm quite saying here, but I think perhaps Sylvia understands. Getting into the heads of people to change those attitudes is very difficult indeed, isn't it, Irene?
Yeah,
I mean, what would your brief to ACPO be to try and stop that? What do you say to ACPO?
Well, I think they've got to lead by example first.
Yeah.
And you know, we still see so much evidence of ACPO ticking the box on diversity. Sorry, I shouldn't say ACPO, chief officers, individual chief officers who tick the box on diversity, who think that because they've put a female into a certain role, that's okay. Because actually, we've now got a female who's head of traffic or a female SIO. Wow, tick the box, that's great. People talk about me being the first potential female president of the Superintendents Association. We're in 2012, it'll be 2013, for goodness sake. You know, yes, it's great to have these achievements, but gosh, we've got to make some progress and we've got to do it differently.
You have a point.
Hi.
Introduce yourself.
Hi, Sophie Wood. I'm here representing the National Trans Police Association. A few points I'd like to make, a couple personal and a couple professional. On a personal level, you ask what you can do in terms of getting away from a tick-box culture, and diversity is not a difficult nut to crack. If I walk into a room in a professional setting, whether it's a conference such as this, whether it's a classroom, whether it's a police canteen, if you talk to me, if you engage with me in the same way as you would talk to the person sitting next to you, you've cracked diversity. Yeah, it's job done. My personal experience is I find people shy away from talking to me and engaging with me within the police service. Quite a lot of the time, I think it's to do with personal prejudice. Sometimes it's actually to do with the fear of the language of diversity, and people don't want to drop themselves in the crud by saying the wrong thing and getting into trouble. And that's a barrier to that communication. On a personal level, you saw a really great music DVD there, shown by Sylvia. And I'd just like to represent the kind of really quite beautiful anger expressed by the singer at the end of his song. That's what goes on inside my head every time I walk into a room and somebody purposefully avoids having to speak to me because of how I look and because of who I am. So that's the personal stuff. Professional stuff, there's about 85 people within the police service who are part of the National Trans Police Association. And every single one of us is not somebody to be dealt with or somebody to be managed because of who we are. We're a part of the police service. We're all policing professionals, and we're all very capable of making a difference. Okay? We are a resource that is there to support you in your policing activities, whether that's dealing with trans crime, whether it's supporting transgender people or people who are different within your own forces. We're a resource there for you to use. The title of this session is The Value of Difference. You are all leaders in policing, and very shortly, and even at the moment, you are dealing with a period of significant change within the police service. And so you will be kind of problem solving things like the communication of change within your own forces. But have you ever considered, for example, you've got 85 people in the National Trans Police Association who I think we can all put our hands on our hearts and say we are the masters of managing change. So please consider there's a resource there who might be able to give you some really useful advice about communicating change and kind of giving you insights into how change affects people. I'm managing my own change, and I'm kind of really liking it, to be honest with you. As a police staff member within my force, I'm being subject to a change which I don't have any control over. And that's a far more uncomfortable change for me than actually transitioning from male to female. Sylvia's presentation was truly inspirational, really emotional for me to watch. But the one thing that I would like to leave with you as a point, it's my first time at conference. I've been inspired by presentations such as Sylvia, but in all the communications I've had with people here, you guys at the conference, I've personally found it inspirational. And I, for one, are going to leave this conference with hope. And a definite feeling that the future of leadership in policing is in very safe hands. So thank you for inviting me, and, you know, good luck. I don't know what to say.